Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the On the Fly podcast, casual conversations around youth lacrosse. I'm your co host, Martin Bose. Today, I'll be joined by my co host, Joey Picard, and our special guest, a colleague and friend of mine, Abby Tepper. We'll be talking about the multi-sport athlete and the benefits of being a multi-sport athlete and why it's so important for us as coaches, as parents, and as administrators to encourage our athletes to play multiple sports. As always, this podcast is powered by Massachusetts Youth Lacrosse. We thank you for being here and listening. Enjoy.
Welcome back to On the Fly, where the lacrosse conversations we're having are casual and free-flowing and, dare I say, even therapeutic. I know they are for me. If you found your way onto our humble little podcast, there's a strong chance you're a big fan of lacrosse. And if you've made it to episode 6, well, it's pretty clear you're an invested stakeholder in our sport, and we appreciate you. And if so, today's topic may alarm you, may seem disturbing, even sacrilegious, because on today's episode, we're going to be talking about and promoting other sports. And Martin, this is where you're going to add in the record scratching soundbite for all of us. Today, we're talking about the multi-sport athlete, why that's important. That's important to the athlete, important to his or her family, his or her coach, his or her team, and the overall health of sports in general. And in what ways we as coaches can support the multi-sport athlete, embrace the multi-sport athlete, even influence the athlete to put down the stick and pick up another type of ball. And we couldn't have found a more perfect guest to join Martin and me, Coach Abby Tepper of Merrimack College, assistant coach for the women's lacrosse team, multiple sport athlete yourself, multi-sport coach as well. And Abby, first of all, welcome. And before I have you introduce yourself and tell us your story, I want to wax poetic a little bit and say that it's not all that uncommon that we find someone who's just kind of great at sports and can excel in multiple sports at a very high level, similar to the way you have with both lacrosse and field hockey at your alma mater, Salve Regina. What I think is more rare and wild to me is the concept of someone who's coached multiple sports at a very high level. And so, for example, I'm not stealing your thunder. I want you to tell your story. You began coaching women's lacrosse at Roger Williams, but then left for a bit to then go to Westchester University, and you coached field hockey. Not only coached field hockey, Martin, her and Coach Cohen coached the national championship winners in Division II field hockey. So, no big deal. Came back, and now you're at Merrimack College with Coach Sargent. So that's remarkable. That's kind of not a story you hear all the time. So I couldn't be more excited to welcome you, to talk about this topic with you. Normally, I ask Martin to limit his bio to 20 seconds or less. I'm not going to do that for you. I want to hear everything from Foxborough all the way up. So please introduce yourself, and please don't be humble, because you have a very impressive background and we're excited to have you.
Thank you so much. That was an awesome introduction, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you both about the multi-sport athlete. So just a little bit about the story, I guess. So I started playing lacrosse in 3rd grade at Foxborough. They had a youth program starting that early, which was awesome. I had like a pastel stick, and I remember we played in a gym, and I thought I was going to play because I wanted to hit people. I thought that was like, it was like the men's game. I was like, oh, I'm going to tackle people. I was like really rambunctious and excited. And then I got there and I was like, oh, we're really not doing that, but I still loved the game. So we started in a gym in like an elementary school. And then I actually didn't pick up a field hockey stick until my sophomore year of high school. So a different type of track. I did cheerleading for a little bit and then decided to do field hockey sophomore year because a lot of my lacrosse teammates freshman year were field hockey players. So I wanted to stay with them. I loved them. And so I started playing field hockey sophomore year at Foxborough, and then fell in love with that sport and the girls and the team and the coach. And then from there, I couldn't decide what sport I wanted to go with. So I was like, I want to play both, or I want to try to play both at least. And I was lucky enough that the coach of Salve was the same coach for field hockey and lacrosse. So it was easy to talk to her about playing both sports, because she was like, yeah, I'll take you for both. So that was right away, like, felt comforting, because I knew if I had to miss fall ball lacrosse for field hockey, that was totally fine. Or spring ball for field hockey, I could go to lacrosse. And she was really flexible in allowing me to play both sports, but be fully invested in the one that I'm in. So I didn't have to worry about the other sports. So I thought that was really awesome. Um, and from there, I just loved coaching. And I originally started coaching for this program called the Outlaws. It was like a really small club out of Foxborough. I did that through high school. And then after I was like dabbling in, I was coaching high school lacrosse and field hockey at Oliver Ames. And then I was a volunteer assistant for field hockey at Stonehill at the same time, assisting Roger Williams lacrosse. So I was like, I don't want to lose either sport yet. And then there came a time where I was like, I need to try to be full time in a sport because it's like really hard to be part time. And, I wanted to make it a career. So I was applying to opportunities, and the Stonehill field hockey coach was friends with the Westchester coach. So she kind of put in a good word for me. And then I was very fortunate to get that job at Westchester. I was there for 3 years. And then Coach Sargent, who I had coached under at Roger Williams, got the job at Merrimack and then asked if I would come home and come with her to help build this program at Merrimack. And I was like, absolutely, I'm all in. I'm so excited. So that's kind of where my coaching journey went.
What I heard in there, which I loved, I heard so much, but I love the Salve Regina coach. And will you remind us of her name?
Her name's Coach Foster.
Coach Foster was flexible but invested in your sport. I think that was the wonderful tipping point that allowed you to be able to do both. So as we're going to have this conversation, that's such a great concept for us to pass along to youth coaches, to be flexible, right? But invested. So I think that's just a terrific story. We're going to hear so much more. We're going to tap into your experience, the life lessons that you've learned, both as an athlete, as a coach. But we always like to kind of start with an icebreaker. And so here's one for you. So let me give you a little bit of background on me. I went to Wake Forest University, and I was there from 2000 to 2004. And when I was there, the women's field hockey team was best in the country. They won back-to-back D1 championships. It was a big deal. They were superstars on campus. I went to a couple of games. I bought into the hype, but I watched them not really understanding all the rules, all the nuances, just appreciating the athleticism, seeing what the sport looked like at the top level. So for folks like me who are regrettably naive about field hockey, here's the icebreaker. Can you tell us what the similarities are, in your opinion, between field hockey and lacrosse?
Yeah, so I think the first similarity that comes to mind is I would compare like the clear and the ride in lacrosse to field hockey's press and outlet. So it's kind of the same thing. And also the field hockey press and outlet relates to soccer. So I'd say those two are most similar, but I would relate the clear and the ride to field hockey's press and outlet, just the way you shift and you can play man and you can play zone and you're shifting and there's different ways that you're trying to force the ball. So I would say, first of all, that would be similar. And you can even take some of the field hockey presses that we do and put them in lacrosse and have them be your ride. I would also say the way you double and trap. So a lot of the times, like someone's forcing and then to their teammate, and you're talking about where you're forcing. So that double also happens in field hockey. And then I would just say, like the creativeness of both sports. You have to be super creative in field hockey, and same with lacrosse. Very creative. But I would say most similar would probably be basketball to lacrosse. I know a lot of people know that and say that, but there are some similarities, but I wouldn't say a ton of similarities between field hockey and lacrosse. I do think they're different just when you start to think of, corner sets in field hockey and then how we play 7v7 in lacrosse. I would more relate that to basketball.
One of the things that fascinates me, and I coach mostly on the boys' side, and the idea of like shooting space violations, not being able to get in it is kind of a foreign concept to me on the boys' side. We teach the boys to just get right in the grill and push and drive. Is there anything like that in field hockey where you have to give them space to go shoot, or can you, more like basketball, stand your ground and get in front?
Yeah, not necessarily. You can come all the way out on ball. Obviously, like especially if you think about there's a position called the fly in field hockey, and they have to go like on a corner set and they're the defensive corner unit. You have to sprint out at that ball. And like usually you're putting that kid out there that has no fear and is not afraid to get hit. But they do wear corner masks for safety, but there's not necessarily like shooting space or anything like that. I will also say a lot of the small sided concepts are similar as well. Like you could take a field hockey 3v2 drill and also put that in lacrosse. So those concepts are the same, just those small-sided games.
Amazing. Marty, I'm going to let you jump in with a question of your own, but I just want to say that as the On the Fly podcast, the position fly is going to be the official position of our podcast. We're all in on that position for sure.
Let's go. Yeah,
It's a scary
appreciate it.
one. It's a scary position.
Well, this is a scary endeavor too. We don't know what we're doing necessarily.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Abby, for being here. I'm lucky enough to have known you for many years now, and I got to coach with you before you went and got that full-time job coaching field hockey, and we stayed in touch, and I got to continue to be colleagues with you as you came back and now have this position at Merrimack. So it's been really cool and rewarding just to kind of be colleagues and friends with you through this whole process. And I thank you for being here with us. This topic in particular is very near and dear to me. You know, I'm someone who played multiple sports really through college and even to this day. And I'm also someone who's seen and have particular stories around players that did not, venture out into other sports, and it really was a detriment, and they ended up burning out and maybe even, getting a scholarship or going to that school that they wanted to go to, but because they had put so much into just this one sport, they didn't have anything in the tank to continue that level of work that they had been putting in. And I think that that's a mistake that parents and coaches can make, is trying to keep up with people or keep people on the top team and what have you. And this concept of valuing being a multi-sport athlete and promoting it as a coach is incredibly important, in my opinion.
Absolutely, I agree.
So Marty, that's a great segue. We're dancing around it. Let's get granular with it. Let's talk about, we have three very experienced coaches here. What are these benefits of being a multi-sport athlete? Let's start quantifying it.
Sure. I mean, for me, the start of it is you are going to pick up, different ways to see the field and see the interactions you have on the field by playing soccer, by playing basketball, by playing football, by playing hockey. Lacrosse in particular is a unique sport because no matter what other sport you do play, you can kind of pull something from it. And so I think we're in a unique position as lacrosse coaches to promote that, because I don't know that you could say that about every other sport, right? But to answer your question directly, right, what is the benefit of playing multiple sports? Well, you're going to become a more well-rounded athlete, and without, I guess, while being vague about it, that's the most direct answer I can think of, is you just become a more well-rounded athlete. You're able to see the field. You're able to experience different types of movement patterns. I think that's really critical, that you're not just repeating the same movement patterns over and over, because as your body develops and as you grow into your body, being exposed to lots of different competitive environments can only be beneficial for you.
What's your take?
I definitely agree with Coach Martin. Also think, you're exposed to different coaching styles, and you get to learn like all different types of coaches, how they coach, what their philosophy is, how they run a practice. So I think it's important to be exposed to all those different coaches, different mentors you'll be able to keep in your life. I still talk to my college coach. So I think that's really important. And then obviously you're exposed to different teams, different cultures. Every team is different. Every culture is different. So just seeing, how does this team interact with one another? Can I bring these things to that team? Like, I don't know, just for example, my field hockey team's super close. We all, are each other's biggest cheerleaders. And then how can I bring that same type of energy to my lacrosse team when spring comes? So I think that's really important. And then obviously there's different challenges in every sport. So, facing adversity. And even if, I might sit the bench on one sport, for example, and then, I might be a starter in another sport, and just like being able to see both sides of that and facing adversity and how I get through it. And I think there's just like a lot of opportunities for adversity and also to lead. And I know both of you to speak a lot on leadership, but there's more opportunities to lead when you're in all different sports and different environments.
Another aspect that probably isn't talked about as much as well is you're learning different sets of rules, right? And there's different through lines, I think, through all sports. Generally speaking, we're looking to have a fair, competitive environment, but having like the cognitive ability to kind of understand and learn a new sport and then master it and then stop and then do another one, I think that does wonders for, the brain and decision making and all the behavior aspects that we're looking for. And so that's another area as well that I think is perhaps not as much talked about. I think you both nailed the big ones. Let's flip it a little bit. What are the dangers of being a single sport athlete? Abby, you start with this one.
So I think one thing I found was I always found so much excitement when I got to move to the next sport. So when I got to put my field hockey stick down and then pick up my lacrosse stick, I was so excited to play that sport. Like just the reinvigorated of like it's a whole different sport. I'm so pumped now for the season. So I think like if you're holding on to that same stick for the whole year and not exposed to, just another stick, another type of game and new teammates, then it kind of gets dull and boring, especially as a youth athlete. Obviously, when you get to the college level, it's different, but just the excitement of I get to come to lacrosse now. Like I'm so excited. So just not getting burnt out.
Like absence makes the heart grow fonder, almost as that of a concept.
Exactly.
Marty, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I think of a few particular athletes I've coached over the years, and unfortunately, I have more examples of this than I would like to admit. There's scenarios where athletes fall in love with lacrosse to the point where they don't want to play other sports, and they start to really believe that story that the only way to get to that like highest level, let's say they really have a goal to play at the collegiate level, is to put in as many reps as possible, right? And there are some truths to that, but there's this sort of not fear, but this sort of issue with if you do not diversify how you spend your time, you're almost guaranteed to, like you said, Abby, to burn out to some degree. And like I said, I've seen so many kids have that high level ambition, and once they sort of achieve the goal of, oh, I've committed to this school and now I'm actually at the school, all of that like drive and effort that they had to get there disappears. I want to add to that as well that when you think about the power of being in different types of situations, I love that you mentioned basketball, Abby. I fully agree that basketball is one of the most similar sports to lacrosse. The environment of boxing out in basketball, as an example, you might not realize that you're actually getting better at like a roll dodge in lacrosse. And next time you step on the field, it just clicks in a different way that you wouldn't have ever had that opportunity if you'd never played basketball or didn't continue to play basketball. So I think the burnout factor is maybe the top thing that I see, but also just the lack of different types of environments is sort of an advantage that you never get a chance to have if you don't play multiple sports.
And the one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the overuse syndrome on the body. When you're using the same muscles, the same ligaments, the same movements, when you don't take a pause and exercise other muscles and movements from different sports, then that can also have a pretty drastic impact, especially on a developing, young human who's in the middle of a severe growth at the same time. So a lot of doctors, a lot of experts will say playing something 365 days a year is just not great for the body as well.
As coaches, I think it's a really low hanging fruit to be like, yeah, I want you to play wall ball on your own, but I also want you to play other sports. Like you can just say that to kids, and you're absolutely in the right. And I would really encourage coaches to do that.
So we've talked about how it benefits an individual to be a multi-sport athlete. Let's talk for a second about how and by the way, we have a little bit. I think we've all kind of mentioned what's great about having multi-sport athletes on the team, but let's get into that a little bit more. How's the team better made up of multi-sport athletes?
I'd say if you even think of like having a basketball player on your team, just the way they approach and they sit low defensively and they know how to be super big and they know how to break down their footwork and be in that defensive stance, I think that's really helpful as an example for other players. So they can just turn to their left, watch her. I can see how she's playing defense. Maybe I want to mimic that now. So I think it's interesting that they can bring different aspects of their game just to the field, and then that influences other players around them becoming better athletes as well.
What I would say is twofold. I have a concept in lacrosse where before you're a goalie or before you're a defender, or before you're an attacker, you're a lacrosse player. There's certain skills every lacrosse player needs to know. Well, before you're a lacrosse player, even, you're an athlete. And there's certain movement patterns that all athletes need to know. And sort of if you've got multi-sport athletes on your team, it's going to be, in some cases, just straight up easier to get everyone to move forward, backwards, left, right, crossover running, curvilinear running, all the different change of directions that might happen in the speed of play are going to be easier to sort of teach. That's one thing. Two is mindset related. The more different types of sports that you play, like you mentioned, Abby, the more different types of coaching that you've already received, and you're more likely to have a group of athletes that's able to take coaching without taking it personal, to take criticism without getting discouraged, right? To adjust a technique without getting so down on yourself because you feel like you're doing it wrong because you got called out. I'm sure many of you have any listeners out there have maybe said this to athletes, but anyone who's, gone through the ranks as an athlete has probably heard a coach say, you know, the more I yell at you or talk to you, maybe not yelling, the better. And you should be worried if I'm not talking to you, right? Because that means in some sense, it's like, I don't think they can really handle the coaching. And the more athletes on the team that are multi-sport athletes, I think the more of a chance that you have to have athletes that are coachable, that are able to take feedback and criticism in a way that's actually productive.
Sure. And you're increasing your chances of being able to pull when you have 15 to 20 kids, other sports. If you're a boxing coach and you have one player that you're trying to, or one boxer that you're trying to influence, you might say to them, have you ever done tennis? Let's talk about hitting a volley at the net. The answer is no. Okay, well, you can't use that. You ask a group of 20 kids who here's played tennis, one or two of them sure is going to know what you're talking about. So you have a bigger pool to be able to use your influence as a coach. And we're going to talk more about coach influence, but you have the ability to talk about all the different sports and activities and connect on some level when you have, such a wide, diverse array of kids who are trying everything at this level. And I think that's a nice segue too, because, we're talking about youth sports, we're talking about youth lacrosse. Most parents kind of early on buy into the idea of let's have our kid try everything. At least we hope so. Sort of the player kind of gets to decide, I'm really into this, I'm really into that. But at the end of the day, and Abby, you're a great example of this. You talked about how you had that conversation in college with your coach about your ability to play both. That doesn't always happen. And realistically, at the youth level, it's the parents who are ultimately making these decisions on which sport, when, and for how long. And, do we do a summer version of it? Do we do it, for a little bit longer? Do we do some camps in the fall? So I'd like to start asking this question because the real decision makers here are the parents. So how can we as coaches help influence the parents to express what we all know and believe is multi-sport is great for the kid?
I think that you can almost like listen to the athlete and listen to the kid and like what they love and what they enjoy. And you never want to make it a job for them. So watching them out there, like, are they finding joy in their sport? Are they super excited to be out there? Are they hitting people's sticks? Are they having a great time? Are they excited to go to practice, or are you trying to drag them out of the house to go? So I think there's a difference of like, I want to hop in the car and go, or we have to go. You made a commitment, you're finishing this, you're not quitting. So I think there's pros and cons to both, but just I think even my parents, like, they were never super hard on me. I was like, you need to go out and do wall ball. You need to go out and get extra reps. They kind of just like, it was more self-driven and self-motivated. And I think that was great because I'm not sure how I would have responded if they were forcing me to do something. I don't think I'd have joy in it anymore if they were like, you have to go out here. I don't think I would be wanting to. I'd be more resistant.
What I would add on to that is to remember and remind parents that there's no necessarily direct correlation between having high levels of success in youth sports to then having great careers at the college and professional levels. A lot of times, some of the best players are like late bloomers, and there's obviously outliers, but we don't need to. If our athlete is telling us, I really want to play college lacrosse, well, that's great, but they're also getting to know themselves. It's our job as parents to understand where to sort of, direct and withhold in some cases based on what we're seeing. And like you're saying, Abby, if I'm seeing a kid that's really not excited to do something, that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, let's quit and give it a break and stop now. But that might mean within the next calendar year, I'm going to plan times where that is absolutely not on their calendar at all, knowing the benefit of being excited about going to training sessions and showing up to practices. And one thing that I would also add to this is the language that parents use. I've worked with a lot of different types of families that have, obviously the kids have different levels of ambition, but I do see a way too often commonality of like, my kid doesn't put the extra work in. Like, he needs to be doing this, she needs to be doing that. And I can speak from my own experience. What I remember sort of my mother doing for me is telling me like, Michael Jordan used to practice a lot on his own. She would just say stuff like that. It wasn't go out, you know what I mean? And she just like let me sit with that. And it wasn't like go out and practice, but it was like, hey, here's what successful people have done. They put in extra work on their own. Do with that information what you will, right? We've talked about in an episode in the past of like the importance of letting these kids make their own decisions. And if they're doing it because you told them to, I think there's a disservice in that in and of itself.
Okay, so besides asking parents to come and listen to this great new podcast called On the Fly, in which coaches are talking about the importance of this, what else can we do with our teams? Are we talking about an email at the beginning of the season? Are we talking about a parent meeting where we say, hey, by the way, this is what we believe. We believe these kids should be able to do a lot of things. And you as parents should really encourage that and foster that exploration. Or is it something where we kind of take it on an individual basis and maybe we ourselves start to see in the player the lack of joy, the feeling that looks like they might be burnt out. They don't have the excitement that they once did under your sphere. And then we kind of say to the parents, well, what else are they doing? So what are some of your strategies of starting to have these conversations with the parents of the kids?
One thing that you kind of mentioned already is like sending out, emails and your form of communication already. But I think there's a little bit of work on the back end that needs to be done. And this is twofold. One is the belief system around the benefit of being a multi-sport athlete. But two is for you as a coach, do you have relationships with coaches of other sports, right? And I think that that's a key thing that you can kind of sneak into the communication of your group is, hey, I've got a relationship with the basketball coach. If you're interested, here's where you can reach out to him. And the other part of that is like, going to practices of, maybe it's not other youth practices, but maybe it's a high school practice that you can go and watch what they're doing and how you can translate that into what you do. I think that's incredibly beneficial. I used to do that at the college level. I would watch the college basketball practices and think about how they're utilizing their angles and the pick and rolls and the fluidity of the drill and how they go from feeding to then cutting, or feeding to then shooting to then cutting, and then, using transition and things like that. There's so many things that we can translate if you keep an open mind and you stay creative. But to try to not get too far off what you originally asked, if we have the belief and the knowledge, because if a belief can turn into knowledge, then the belief doesn't become as important. If we just know that being a multi-sport athlete and learning from other coaches is beneficial, you're going to start to say it more. You're just going to start to talk about it more naturally. And so, we don't want to create a template and be like, oh, I'm supposed to talk about multi-sports now. If you really believe that, you'll be more inclined to communicate that through your emails, your texts that you send out, and certainly the in-person interactions are the most influential.
So maybe less empirical studies where you share with all of the parents, some study done at the University of Montreal that proves your point, but more anecdotal, right? More relationship-based stories where you can talk about kids from town who did, multiple sports and where they are now and what decisions they made. So is that sort of the path that you're kind of setting us up on?
Yes, and I think, if you're into this, right, I think there are some studies that you could look into, and I think that's beneficial. But yeah, I think the storytelling is more powerful. And maybe it's not something that you lived through, but like for me personally, it is. And to this day, I just get so much value in like playing a game of volleyball, or trying out pickleball, or right, swinging the golf club around. And the mindset and the type of focus that it takes for that particular sport is always unique, yet there are always through lines as well, right? So yeah, I think the storytelling is probably the most influential way to communicate that. And for any coaches out there that have not ventured in their own athletic journey, like maybe this is a call to action, right? Maybe this is your chance to go try out that pickleball or go try out some sport that you've been meaning to, and it will make you a better lacrosse coach.
Abby, with your work with Merrimack, I know you're an assistant coach and you're there and you everyday X's and O's and game day and practices, but you also have a role in the recruitment as well, correct?
Yeah.
So let me take it from this angle. I had a great friend who was also in recruiting, not for lacrosse, for other sports down in the South. And one thing that he told me once was that kids from New England are kind of getting a special look because they are well-rounded multi-sport athletes, because we don't have the benefit of playing football 365 days a year just because of the weather. They have to go indoor and pick up basketball, pick up hockey, take up swimming, something. And the reason for that from a college perspective is that there's this untapped potential in them. They haven't hit their ceiling. They haven't been overcoached. They're not know-it-alls who've gotten every level of coaching from 8 years old to 18 years old. A, is that your experience? And B, if so, is that something that we can use to influence the parents to say, look at it from a college recruitment perspective? This is something that college coaches like Coach Tepper at Merrimack value. And therefore, keep that in mind as you're balancing whether or not, Victoria should do softball and lacrosse or both at the same time.
Yeah, I think like of course a well-rounded athlete, everyone's going to be wanting to go after that particular athlete. I think that's really important, and just the exposure to different types of coaches. I think that's really important, what we talked about previously. I also think like just pure athleticism. Like if they're playing multiple sports, they're likely super athletic and able to translate from sport to sport, different movements and abilities. So I think that's really important. I think they're going to be super athletic because they're able to succeed in multiple sports. So I definitely think it's an advantage to be able to play multiple sports.
So parents, listen to that. That's great advice right there and then, right?
I would say one thing that's super fun to incorporate in your practice is maybe play soccer just to go over spacing and see how those athletes adjust. Like, how do they switch the field? Because the same way you switch the field in soccer is going to be the same way you switch it in lacrosse. So, like, being able to add a game that you can quickly play that everybody knows, I think that's really good because you can see their athleticism there. Can they translate it from sport to sport? Players that do play multiple sports are also raw. And we've talked about this, like, their ceiling is so high and there's opportunity for them to grow through college because they played multiple sports and maybe they didn't tap fully into lacrosse. So I think they're definitely coachable, and then there's so much room for them to improve. So maybe they're super athletic but their stick's not there, so it's really easy to teach someone the stick skills when you have that athlete in front of you that's played multiple sports.
But what they're bringing that you can't quite teach is the heart, right? Because they're so invested in all these things. They're just a natural athlete. So I love that. Even at a college level, you have the confidence to say, I can teach them the strategy, I can teach them the skill set, but I want them to come in here with just that natural athleticism that they've shown by being into all these different things and just wanting to go out and compete, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, what I'm hearing also is like, just to kind of rephrase it, not to say that there's no value in working on your stick skills as a middle school kid, right? But what I'm hearing is that it's even more valuable to create an overall foundation of athleticism and coachability, because you can always build on that at the higher levels versus like mastering your stick work. And I'm a lacrosse player and this is what I do when I'm in sixth grade, but then when it comes time to try out for the high school varsity team, your spatial awareness and your ability to be flexible and have different styles of play maybe isn't there, right? Because you focused more on stick skills than you did being an athlete, let's say.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those athletes, have sometimes have a higher IQ if they played multiple sports because they can take a certain IQ from basketball or another sport and bring that to the lacrosse field on how they are setting picks or how they're setting screens on ball or off ball. So I think they can bring that IQ element with them as well.
So I want to shift a little bit and start talking about practical ways we can use other sports. Again, this is the sacrilegious part, but we can use other sports to augment our practices and our strategy. But I just want to hit one kind of final idea on this, which is the coach supporting the multi-sport athlete. What can we do to say this is an environment where we think it's okay, where we're not saying to a kid, you really should be doing this year round. After our spring season here, I really want you to go and play for this club, and then I want you to hit a fall clinic in winter. What ways can we kind of influence the sphere to say it's great that you're going to put this down for a little bit and pick up something else?
I would just say, from my perspective, valuing town sports, right? The only scenarios I've heard that coaches are actively saying, I don't want you to go play that sport, you're only going to do this and that and the other thing, is in the club environment. And, maybe you can argue that there's better coaching in club environments and coaches that have had more high level experience, and there's certainly value to that. But anytime, and I've heard many coaches say this, anytime you come across a coach that's telling you not to be a multi-sport athlete, that should be a major red flag, and it needs to be addressed immediately, right? So yeah, it's just my first thought.
So Abby, I'd like to hear yours, but I want to throw in one thing that we do in Duxbury that we're really proud of, because the lacrosse program, there's lots of sports in Duxbury. We're where I coach. But one of the things that we have been instrumental in leading is what we call the Duxbury Recreation Collaborative. And this is when the heads of each of the youth programs get together, which we do regularly. And we do it for a couple of reasons. We do it for the collective buying power against like the field rentals and all that stuff, to kind of be one voice. We're fighting for turfs and in town. But the other thing that we do is we've established these lines of communication and relationships that allow us to schedule at the same time and avoid known conflicts that will allow a family who wants it and is willing to put in this kind of work to play baseball on Mondays and Wednesdays and have lacrosse on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're not actively combating one another and saying, oh, you got to pick. At some point they do. At some point around middle school, they start to say, this is all too much. And I have, multiple practices. I have a couple of games a week. I really have to kind of pick one, and that's okay. But that shouldn't happen in second grade, third grade, fourth, even fifth grade. They should still be allowed to play whatever they can. So this is not really for your typical coach so much as maybe a town leader that might be listening. Martin, you kind of talked about get to know other coaches, go to their practices. In a bigger picture as well, work with them, right? Find ways to say, we don't have to, be combative one another. We can all share from the same pool and let these kids try everything. I don't believe in this idea of an open market where let the kids try it and let them do such a great job in your town that they can't wait to pick lacrosse. Like just do a great job there, but allow them to have a little taste of everything and experience it, and then try to do as much as possible. So that's just one thing I wanted to pass along before I get Abby's take on this.
I mean, I think that's awesome that you all work together to schedule. I think that's probably not common at every youth program. So I think that's really great that, all the youth programs get together, different sports, and make sure the schedules aren't conflicting. I would say, as a youth coach, being flexible with the schedule if they do conflict. So say a kid's coming to your practice and they come up to you and they're like, I have to leave 20 minutes early. Is that okay? I have to run and get to another game. Like being accepting of that and being like, that's absolutely okay. Yeah, good luck. And like, cheering them on and supporting them through those other sports. And also with that, like be a cheerleader for the other sports, like emphasize the players. I love that you play basketball. I think that's awesome. And being a cheerleader, even on social media, I know social media is so big now. Like as your youth program, you can even, repost a different team in your town that had a championship or was making the playoffs, like celebrating those sports through Instagram. I know social media is so powerful. So just showing that you support that and the other teams in the community.
Yeah, I love that. Not to throw a wrench into it, but to play devil's advocate a little bit, right? What happens though when a kid signs up and they miss more than half of your games because of this other sport? Is there a line that we draw where we say, hey, listen, we are all about you trying everything, but you made a commitment to this team and we're expecting you here's the bare minimum that we're expecting you to make. Maybe not 100%, but 75, 80%. So let's talk a little bit about those conversations we have to say, while we believe in this, we also still want you to make a commitment to the in-season sport, which is us, which is town, which is lacrosse, which whatever it might be. So thoughts on that, Martin?
Yeah, I would just want to draw first a hard distinction. Like, are we talking about, hey, during lacrosse season they also want to be a baseball player or a volleyball player, or are we talking about them going to play for some club program during your town lacrosse season? Because I think those are two very different conversations and probably a different bar to set. I think it's a slippery slope if it's the club player. I think that's an issue that the club team themselves isn't backing off during town lacrosse season. That's something that is a problem in my opinion.
And I think that's a bigger conversation for sure. And I'd love to tackle that. Let's talk about for a second about another sport. Let's just say hockey. And there's so many kids who play hockey and lacrosse, and I love my hockey players. I kind of shudder at the fact that there's rinks that are still frozen in the middle of June when they come and tell me that I can't come to lacrosse, I have hockey, and I go, you're kidding me, right? But let's just talk about it from that perspective. If they've committed to two things and they're just not really making it work, do we as coaches kind of say to them, you got to pick, or do we just kind of say, well, all right, we have you every other Sunday, we'll make that work?
I think first to fourth grade, you let it fly. But when you do have that conversation, and I think in the first, fourth grade, you can't have that conversation, obviously needs to be with the parents. That's probably true all the way through youth. Maybe in the seventh, eighth grade age range, you can start to have a more serious conversation with the athlete and just sort of asking them, like, what are your sort of priorities here, and like you said, maybe there's a certain amount of practices or games that you need to make on a monthly basis. For most youth teams, it's 2 practices and 1 game a week, right? And if you're not able to make, what's that times 4, right? If you're not able to make half of that, 4 practices and 2 games per month, you know, is it really worth it to you? And if they're like, absolutely, I still absolutely love this, it's just this, that, and the other thing, I think you do have to take it on a case by case basis, but it needs to go through the parents. Ultimately it is up to the parents where they drive their kids, and if the kid's like, yeah, like I want to do this, that, and the other thing, and you're like, listen, parent, I really need them at least half our stuff, minimum. Can you make that happen? No. All right. Well, we may need to have a second conversation, right? So I think it is a case by case, but yeah, it's an interesting concept because that is extremely challenging. I know for a lot of youth coaches, making your practice plan, right? You need to, like a lot of coaches know, on my Tuesdays, I have most of my team. On my Thursdays, a lot of them have this other thing going on, and I have to plan accordingly, and that becomes a challenge in and of itself. So yeah, the communication and being proactive about it is, I think, critical for coaches early on in the season.
Especially when you get into things like playing time. Like in town-based youth, we try to get equal playing time as often as humanly possible. I know goalie can be a little different, and sometimes when they specialize in certain positions, but our ultimate goal is we want every kid whose family is paying to be a part of this to get equal playing time, but they also have to earn that by being an active participant. And it's really hard to tell some kid who comes to 100% of your practices, gives it 100% all every time, someone who comes into a quarter of them, but just happens to be a crazy stud athlete. Well, it's kind of a natural coach kind of instinct to be like, well, I kind of want them out there when it matters. That's totally unfair for the family who's all in on this. So it's a balance. It's a hard watch. Let's change focus for a second. We've talked so much about pulling in other sports as coaches. We've talked about supporting them. We've had good conversation with parents. What are some of our favorite drills that may have originated from other sports? What are things that you, Coach Martin, and you, Coach Abby, are taking from other sports and finding great use on a lacrosse field? Abby, we'll start with you.
I would say, I remember when I was a field hockey coach, they took a lot from soccer and they would take a ton of small sided games from soccer and implement them into field hockey. They would do like lots of possession drills that they took from soccer. So, and everything with first touch, I believe that originated from soccer. I'm not 100% sure, but, they started implementing first touch in the direction that you want to go. And that was really big in field hockey and also a similarity in soccer. They took a lot of drills from the small sided games of soccer and brought them into field hockey when I was coaching field hockey.
Awesome.
I'll mention a few principles that are directly applicable from basketball to lacrosse. If you think about transition situations and the shapes that you end up making, so in a 3-on-2 in basketball versus a 3-on-2 in lacrosse, it's the same. You create a triangle on offense, you create a stack formation on defense. The top player in the stack is going to stop ball, whereas the bottom player is going to take the first pass. Same exact thing. The angles of that, right? Kind of cutting at a diagonal angle, cutting to the back pipe in lacrosse, cutting straight to the net in basketball. Those are the same, defensive principles. Abby, you mentioned the ability to kind of get in that deep athletic stance as a basketball player on defense. It's the same thing in lacrosse. You just get to be actually a little bit more physical, right? With the stick and the ability to use your stick in scenarios and different types of checks. That's obviously unique to lacrosse, but the footwork and athleticism is the same. And when you think about team defense concepts, in basketball, the furthest player from the ball, right? The defender that's covering the player furthest from the ball is going to be the most sloughed in, right? Towards the center, because if there is sort of a help rotation that happens, they have the least dangerous player. It's the same concept in lacrosse. And I know none of these are specific drills, but I really like to be a principles-based coach. And if I can teach athletes principles, they become more dynamic and they have the ability to make plays in different scenarios and things aren't as scripted, right? The other directly related principle from basketball to lacrosse that feels very, very important is the concept of pick and rolls, and the angles of those pick and rolls. That, even where you do it, on the basketball court, being able to cut after setting a pick, right? The roll and the direction of the roll, very, very similar from basketball to lacrosse. So some of the drills that I would watch in basketball, it's like there's continuous motion, and you have to really watch it to figure out, okay, what is the sequence? And some of this is pretty tough to dumb down for a youth program, so it's not necessarily worth me going through the exact details of a sequence. But if you are mapping out, okay, I want to work on a drill that covers multiple skills, you may be able to teach your players pick and rolls without actually having to explain it. Maybe it's after you feed to the shooter across, you're going to be the one who cuts towards this cone over here to make a catch and finish, and then you're going to rotate to that next shooting line. And without them realizing it, they just set a pick and they're rolling, and we can ask them to turn in a certain direction. So I get excited. I know I'm on a little bit of a tangent here, but I get really excited about the similarities of basketball and lacrosse, because basketball was my first love growing up. I used to watch Space Jam on repeat. I was obsessed. And then as I discovered lacrosse, there just became this natural intuition to kind of play lacrosse like I did basketball. My crossover in basketball turned into my split dodge in lacrosse. And there's so many direct correlations there. So, yeah, I love talking about it.
Lacrosse needs our version of Space Jam, to get the next generation really as excited as you are. Abby, what were you going to say?
Seed planted.
Sorry, Marty got me thinking as he was talking, just more so even of like concepts and principles and the way your body moves. So, I feel like you can relate even eliminations in field hockey, how you eliminate someone and seal them off. That's going to be very similar to how you're going to jab and go in lacrosse. So I think like if you look at the small movements and break them down, they're very similar, as opposed to like the big concepts. I would also say I remember even at Westchester, they like brought a drill from lacrosse, but just turned it, like just made it so it was going vertical instead of coming from the side. So I think you can just take a lot of different drills from different sports and just adapt it for the sport you're coaching.
Marty, you talked a little bit about that defensive position, and I think that's the universal defensive position. You can take a kid who's done almost anything. Baseball, that's softball, that's an infielder waiting for that ground ball to come to them. A cornerback in football, tennis being at the net, that's a boys and girls sport where just the natural body positioning, balls of your feet, the anticipation, the ability to pounce in any directions. What I love when teaching this defensive concepts at the youngest ages is you can ask these kids, what sport do you play? And whether they say soccer, whether they say volleyball, whether they say tennis, whatever, you can say, okay, the universal defensive position. So basketball is such a great correlation, but I believe you could pull from so many things. So for the coaches out there who don't have a lacrosse background, but had another sport, I promise you can pull things from your experience. And even if it's not X's and O's, it's practice habits, right? It's how to be an athlete. It's, behavior, and it's cognitive approaches to the sport. There's so many ways that you can come in and be a great influence in the sport without having played, NCAA lacrosse. So this is a great conversation. We can talk on and on and on, but I want to one more shift before we get to our FAQs. Abby, you had mentioned earlier how sometimes at your practices you'll play soccer, like you'll let your players just kind of try a new sport there. What else have we done or seen in a lacrosse field that's directly from another sport? Because I have a few, but I'm curious to see if you've all done anything else as well.
Yeah, I think you can also let them play. Obviously, we've talked about it a lot, but like you can let them play basketball, and then you're just trying to see how they move off one another offensively and then how the defense shifts. I mean, you can take a lot of zones from defense. So I think it's fun to throw in basketball with your team. I think really any type of like fun game you can throw in that everybody knows is super fun. Even kickball, like that's fun, and how you're going to move and how you're going to communicate and how you're going to have a heads up play. So I think incorporating any type of fun sport, even like a gym class sport, I think it's really fun for them to compete with a different sport and not a stick in their hand, and also work with their teammates to problem solve and make plays.
So interesting. So you're actually suggesting put the lacrosse stick down and play a real kickball, not a kickball version of lacrosse, but kickball. Have them go play kickball.
Yes, have them play kickball. They'll have a blast.
I love that.
I love it. I have a few examples as well, Coach. One is kind of like a camp style game. You could definitely do it at a youth practice, but it's lacrosse baseball, right? That's a fun one where you have to maybe get particular about how you're going to set the rules up and the bases and all that. But that one is a lot of fun. Another really low hanging fruit is you can use a basketball or a football for this, but to go through lacrosse shapes, maybe you're working on team defense or maybe you're working on team offense. But to get rid of the stick and just have a basketball or a football be what gets thrown around can be really, really beneficial to let athletes kind of get their mind off the stick skill aspect and be more focused on the spacing. That's been really helpful for a lot of youth coaches because, as we know, catching is just so freaking hard. The other one that I think is pretty commonly used in like a clinic environment and definitely can be a fun game at youth practices is ultimate lacrosse, right? Ultimate frisbee turned lacrosse, where when you have the ball, you're only allowed to take, let's say, 2, maybe 3 steps. And there's no goals. The way you score points is kind of like an end zone in football. And you got to catch the ball in the end zone to get that point. And that can be a really, really helpful game to get some more off-ball movement and to still weave in the skills of lacrosse, but to have it be in that kind of environment that feels like a totally different game.
That's the one I was going to use. I love that. Coach Nate Kittler of Natick High School brought that to our Mass Bay Colonials, which is the tour team of Mass Youth Lax. And I was, kind of at first being like, we only have 3 practices with these kids. We're really going to do ultimate frisbee, but it was amazing. Like, it was great. What he did, I want to talk about it a little bit, is the goalie was automatic offense. So there was always an uneven situation. It was 5-on-4, 6-on-5. So the goalie just stayed on offense, which I really liked. And what I loved about this is that it really forced that off-ball movement and creativity. When the ball carrier can't move, his teammates or her teammates have to get open. And this is where they have to get creative with cuts, with screens. And so the creativity and the imagination started to flow with these kids. They started to bond really quickly. There's a lot of communication. So I have since, this was about 4 years ago, but I've used these almost every year. We play a game of lacrosse ultimate frisbee. And so I love that. So that's the perfect example. That's exactly what I was looking for. This has been amazing. We've talked at great length. There's so much more we can say, but I'm conscientious of our listeners' ability. So before we wrap it up, final thoughts, things that we may have missed, put a bow on something, Marty?
Yeah, I just had one thought, in like the particular drills section of this conversation. I had my high school basketball coach, maybe the greatest coach I ever had, Bob Fisher. Incredible the way that he was able to motivate us. He had us do this drill where we'd all line up on the baseline and we'd all have a number, and 2 of us would all have the same number, right? So for every one number, there's 2 players, right? Roll out a basketball, and he'd call out the number. We had to run and dive for that basketball on that hardwood floor, just because, just to garner that excitement. And I ended up translating that to lacrosse. Such an easy environment to where that makes sense is on shot backups, right? And so I would do the same thing. I'd line everyone up on the goal line. I'd have everyone with a number. I'd roll the ball out. I'd call out a number or 2. And I want players to run and sprint and practice diving for that ball. And I thought that was relevant to bring up in this conversation because obviously it applies to multiple sports, but it's also like, you need to get your team excited, or, you want to get kids laughing because, this will get them going. You might feel like this is a punishment. It's not. They actually love doing stuff like this. And it's also for safety. I mean, if you're never falling down and you're not used to that, you're potentially more injury susceptible. Whereas if you're doing that at practice, you're like, all right, let me see what it feels like to Superman dive. I think that can be both fun, encouraging, and get some excitement going and get some competitiveness going, but also has some actual real practical benefits. So
I
yeah,
love
just
that.
wanted to toss that in there.
If 2 kids have the number 7 and you shout out 7, this is 1-on-1. So is it the same 2 kids each time, or are you able to mix up the pairings a little bit?
Well, what I end up doing is calling every number by the end, but yeah, I'll mix it up. I try to make it so that they're similar speed. But I also am adding in the which I got from Coach Fisher of like, even if I'm way faster than you, we have the same number, Coach Joey, and I beat you to the ball, I still have to dive. We're working on diving. That's the skill, right? But yeah, we can switch the numbers up, and by the end of it, I'm calling out, all right, everybody, I want everyone diving at the same time. And that's one of those
hilarious.
things. I did this at the high school level where maybe not for the 1 through 4s, but you could probably do this with 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders of like, all right, when I call everyone, if not everyone dives, we're going to keep doing this drill until everyone dives. We only have to do 1 rep if we all do it. And without a doubt, you're going to have 3, 5, 7 kids that like kind of go onto their knee and fall onto their side because they're so nervous about it. And there's something special that happens when they actually get over that.
Abby, as you listen to that, do you think that that's kind of a boys' drill and the girls wouldn't love that? Or do you think that the young ladies would
Yeah, I
enjoy
don't
that?
know. It might be hard to convince them to dive, but I do think it would be really fun. It sounds really fun.
Abby, did we miss anything that you'd love to talk about as it relates to multi-sport athletes?
Okay, so as we talked about drills, that might be super fun and help with, critical thinking and problem solving and numbers up, numbers down. I think playing three by is really useful with the small mini nets, and a tennis ball, because I think it helps people, have super soft hands when they're catching, have more finesse with their stick. And then, get super creative and have fun. And it's okay to miss the net. And, it's super small. And having someone on their knees in the cage being a goalie, it starts to get you unafraid of the ball. And I think it's really fun to play that and get creative and use a tennis ball because you have to have soft hands. So I think that's a fun game to implement maybe at the end of the year at your youth practices.
Oh, I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, anyone who's been to my coach trainings has always heard me be. I'm a huge proponent of. I just call it tennis ball mini lax. Three by. Just I call it tennis ball mini lax because I'm. Depending how big your group is, maybe it's 4-on-4, maybe it's 5-on-5. Anything more than that probably doesn't make sense. But like literally, you don't have a net. Find a trash barrel, tip it on its side. There's your goal, right? And playing with a tennis ball, like you said, just has so many benefits. So I absolutely love that. Yeah, youth coaches. That's such a low hanging fruit of how to play more at practice is a small-sided game with a tennis ball.
Well, I feel like I threw some great questions at you, and you both hit home runs with them. So I appreciate that. Some great content to eat up for coaches. But I had a couple of more that came to us from some other coaches that are stuff that we can all quickly address as well. So quick answers to these. Here are a few. Someone who's listening into this who buys into the idea of a multi-sport athlete asks, should I feel guilty about offering fall sessions and winter skills and promoting summer camps in addition to my spring season of town lacrosse?
I don't think so. I think like having multiple offerings is awesome. And, if they want to come, they will, and they will sign up. And, if they're too busy and burnt out, they won't sign up. But having the ability to make that decision on having the opportunity that you can pick up your stick and go, I think that's really important just to have the opportunity. And I think it's good to pick up your stick in the off season. I don't think it's harmful because you'll still get excited, but I think, you should offer those year round, and those who want to come, they will, and they'll show up and they'll be excited to pick up their stick in the off season.
Yeah, absolutely. Do not feel guilty about it. Creating opportunities to keep the stick in your hands is different than saying don't play other sports, right? And for those out there listening, hey, we've got clinics coming up November 9th, 10th, and 11th. We're calling it the Get Out and Play Days. Visit massyouthLax.org to sign up. We've got pro players. We've got positional clinics. We've got learn to play clinics, multiple locations around the state. So clearly, I don't feel guilty about it. Go check that out.
And I think Mass Youth Lacrosse does a great job of offering things on days that kids don't have school. So I think they do a great job with their scheduling and programming and making sure they're offering something when, maybe parents need to work, but the kids don't have school, and giving them the opportunity to bring their kid to a clinic during those days. I think that's really great.
And these aren't full commitments the way a spring program is. These are, 1 day a week little clinics or one timers or, a week camp. And you can still tell the parents, we'd love to have you come play if the schedule allows, but we still expect and encourage and endorse you to be doing a fall sport, a winter sport that we don't want to interfere with. So I think that message comes along. So I think those are all great answers. Another one is if we have a player that's exclusive to the sport and no conversation, no argument will convince them to put their stick down for part of the year, should we feel obligated to lessen their load so that we're not contributing to their overconsumption? Tough one, right?
I'm going to go with no, that you're not going to lessen their load, but you are going to start to have serious conversations with the parents to find something else. It doesn't even need to be a sport, and to plan a quarter of the year that they are significantly removed from it. Like I've mentioned multiple times, there's just so many instances where athletes burn out and, they're still getting to know themselves. Think how ridiculous it is to ask a fourth, fifth, sixth, even seventh or eighth grader, like, do you want to play college lacrosse? Like, I don't, they maybe they do, maybe they don't, but it's not important right now. What's important right now is that they continue to have fun and that they're excited about playing sports in general, right? So, no, I don't think we need to necessarily lighten their load. However, you do need to stay keen to, is someone that used to be excited now really, really changing their body language? Is something what's going on there, right? Did something happen that makes sense, or is that a start of the symptoms of burnout happening? And I think that that's very relevant in that maybe in that instance you're encouraging the parent to, hey, you know what? Why don't you take practice off next week because I want this player to play the next 3 years. I don't care if they don't make the next practice, if that's going to help them, in their mental state, because the last thing you want to do is force it, right? So I do think it's a case by case, but no, off the bat, I don't think you need to go out of your way to lighten the load.
So Martin, you're a master of the plug and the callback, and so I'm gonna kind of take a page out of your book and say, go listen to our episode 3 on emotional intelligence, which will allow you to kind of pick up on the body language of whether this player is feeling a little burnt out, a little kind of distant from it, is a kind of overconsumed. So that's a nice little way of kind of connecting it back to something we've already talked about as well. I coach with a parent whose heart is in the right place. He wants all the players to pick lacrosse as their primary sport. So as often as he can, he makes fun of baseball and baseball players. And I don't think the players find it as funny and playful as he thinks he's being. So advice on getting him to curb the maligning of baseball without a full-blown confrontation. This has actually become a Dear Abby. Like we're getting advice now. I love this. So Dear
I
Abby.
love it.
This is something I had to deal with myself. I did that. I'm that guy.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Were you the
I
one
was
teasing
that
or
guy.
being teased?
I was teasing baseball.
Okay.
Is this about you then? Did someone write
It's
this
not
about
about
you?
me. No, I'm just saying it was something that I would use to be like, you don't want to play, like, you want to play baseball? It's boring. It's this, that, and the other thing. And that's not helpful, right? You don't build a bigger building by knocking other people's down. And so I just kind of stopped. But I think for someone for a coach out there who's actively doing that, listen, baseball's a great sport. Lacrosse is a great sport. If an athlete wants to try to play both, let's try to make it happen. But I think that, actively bashing and, putting another sport down, like I said, being negative is never going to create some positive on the back end, right?
I agree. I think and even that goes to in business and in life, anytime you're bringing someone else down, like your business or what you're trying to do isn't going to grow because you're focused on bringing something else down. So I think it's really important to even uplift, yeah, go try it. You should try it and then see which one you really do love. Cause, you know, kids might miss the opportunity of going to a sport that they might actually love even more. So I think giving them that opportunity to explore the different sports and even challenging them, yeah, go try it. And then if you really love us, come back. We'd love to have you back. So I think giving them the opportunity to choose what they want to do, I think that's important.
That's a really wonderful, uplifting note to end on. I think it's a great sentiment. Rest on your laurels and be confident in your ability to give them a great experience, and they'll come back. If that's what their love is, make it so that it's a hard choice for them. But if it is their choice to go somewhere else, then honor, embrace it, and be a good human is what I'm hearing. And so, Abby, this was such a pleasure to have you. But it was a great joy to meet you and to hear your story and to hear your contributions to multi-sports in both lacrosse and field hockey and many others as well. So thanks for being with us. Thanks to all of our listeners for sticking with us through 6 episodes and for your support down the road. Thank you to all of the folks at Massey Flax for your support and for powering this podcast. And Marty, as always, a pleasure to see you and talk to you. And we have another great episode coming up next time.
All right. Thank you, Abby. Appreciate you being here. Thanks, Coach Joey. See you guys next week.
Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it.